All right, now one aspect of 3D modeling is you need the ability to manipulate geometry. So up until this point, we've been using parametric objects. So that means we have objects that have parameters that we can adjust. And so that's true with our primitive objects like our cube and all the other primitive objects here. That is also true with our spline objects, which is that rectangle, all these other objects here. Again, parametric has its own parameters like the rounding, all that kind of stuff. And same thing with an extrude. An extrude object and a spline that you feed into it, like this rectangle, they are both parametric as well. They have live parameters that you can adjust. Now, at this point, with parametric objects, much like shape layers in After Effects, you can't access the points of a shape layer. To do that, you have to convert it to a path, and that's how you can adjust the points on that path. The same thing goes with any type of geometry or spline object inside of Cinema 4D. So if I wanted to start modeling and manipulating the 3D geometry we have here, what I'd need to do is change it from a parametric object to a editable object. So if I select this cube object here, and I go all the way down to this icon here, and you can see that then the lower left here, you'll get a little preview of what this is. It says it converts a parametric object into a polygonal object. So the shortcut key for that is C. Typically, I will always hit C. So C is a very important shortcut key for this. There you go. There's the little helper that shows up right there. If you hover your cursor long enough, it's going to have a little help box there as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and, again, anytime you're using anything in Cinema 4D and there's a shortcut key, see what the shortcut key is, don't hit the button, and then just try to memorize it. So it's like, okay, so C is the keyboard shortcut. So I'll go ahead with that cube selected, I'll hit C, and you'll see that all our parameters went away. So if I undo that, Command or Control Z, you'll see all the object properties there, the size, XYZ, the segments, separate surface, fillet, all that stuff goes away, and this is changed into a piece of geometry that we can go ahead and edit. So at this point, we can cover the different aspects of geometry. So a piece of geometry is made up of 3 components. We have, if I go to point, you can see that we have points on our cube here. And you can see as I select a point, you get that 3D axis that I can go and move this point around. Now, another component to geometry is their edges. So if I go ahead and select the edge mode here, I can go ahead and select these edges. And same thing, I can go ahead and move this in 3D space. I can even scale this by hitting T or rotating this as well. So ERT, all of those handy shortcut keys that hopefully you've committed to memory by now, you can do these same things with edges, as well as the third component that makes up 3D geometry, and that is a polygon. So if I go to polygon mode here, you can see that I can go and select these polygon faces. So you can see I can move this face around. I can hit T for scale and scale this around, rotate this, and you can see this is how you can start to model geometry, okay? So I just made that cube editable and turned it into a piece of geometry. I can do the same thing with this spline object by selecting it. And remember, there's the button there, but we are going to use the shortcut key, which is C. So I'll go and hit C, and you'll see now a spline in Cinema 4D is the same thing as a path in After Effects or Illustrator, where it's just made up of points. So you can see I can select these points now and adjust these points on this now live spline object. So I'm going to go Command Control Z to undo all that. And I just want to show you that when I hit C, all of these object properties, the width, height, rounding, all those go away when I hit C. So that is the difference between a parametric object and a live piece of geometry, and an editable piece of geometry where you can edit everything as far as the points, edges, and polygons go. You can no longer access those parametric options that we had before, like the height, width, and say rounding for this rectangle. Now, as far as this extrude goes, if I go and make this rectangle editable by hitting C, you'll see that now we can see our spline. And as long as I'm in point mode, I can select the spline points and move these around, and you can see they will get extruded. Now, things will start to get messed up if I move this in Z space here. But if I want to make this extrude object editable, and you'll see all the different options we have here, in its parametric state, if I select the extrude object and hit C, you're going to see that all of those options go away. I'm just left with my coordinates. And now you can see that this is basically a editable cube. So I can adjust the points, go to edge mode, edges, and go to polygon mode, and the polygon faces. So again, these are the three components that make up 3D geometry. So point, edge, and polygon. So get familiar with those terms. And if you want to switch between any of those aspects and manipulate any of them, just go up to this little menu here. You can also select multiple objects by holding the Command or Control key down and selecting another object in your object manager. And you can go ahead and select points on multiple objects. I can hold Shift and select all these objects here. And I can even use my different selection modes here. So rectangular selection, remember the shortcut key for that is 0. I can go and select all of these points and then move these around as a whole, rotate these points around as a whole. And this is basically the fundamentals of how to manipulate 3D geometry, is by manipulating their points, edges, and polygons, and then doing other types of modeling commands to them, which we'll get into right now. Now, one of the most common ways to model, especially in organic form, is a type of modeling called subdivision modeling. So let me show you what that is. So I'm going to create a cube here, and it's very sharp. We have no rounding on the edges or anything like that. And we're going to go to our generators menu here, and we're going to grab a subdivision surface. So let me go ahead, and because this is a generator, I need to feed the object that I want to generate new geometry off of into the subdivision surface, or make it a child of the subdivision surface. And let me go ahead and do just that. So I'll hover over, release my mouse, and all of a sudden you can see that the subdivision surface basically turned my cube into something that more resembles a sphere. So let's go see what's actually happening behind the scenes here. So if I go to display and go to garage shading with lines, and the shortcut key for that is N and then B. So what I like to do is take note of the shortcut key and then just go ahead and commit it to memory and just force myself to remember it by going N, and this will bring up your view menu keys, and then just hit B for the garage shading with lines. And you can see all of the edges and the polygons here and all the outlines. And so basically, if I turn off the subdivision surface by just clicking that checkbox and making it an X, you can see the original edges we had and the original polygon faces we had on our cube. And if we turn back on the subdivision surface and click on the subdivision surface and go to the object tab, you can see that basically what we're doing is subdividing it and smoothing it out at the same time. So if I move this subdivision viewport down to 0, you can see that we're back to our original cube. If I go up one level, you can see that each polygon face here got subdivided into 4 polygons, and then it got rounded. Okay, and so if we go up another level, you can see we just exponentially subdivided again and made it much more smooth. So the more we subdivide this, the more polygons and the more detail and the more smooth we're going to have our model. So you can see there's the subdivision viewport and the subdivision renderer. The subdivision viewport is what we're going to see in our viewport. Okay, so if I bring this down to 0, but my subdivision renderer is set to 2, if I go and render this, you can see that we rendered out the subdivided version that was subdivided 2 times. So that's the difference here. So these options are just there so you can have lighter geometry in your viewport scene and then be able to render at a higher res when it comes to render time. So typically what I'll do though is keep both of these values consistent, so I'm not modeling at one level and rendering at another level. And why using a subdivision surface is so great is that it will allow us to model a lower res version or a lower res cage version of the object and then get a higher detailed end result that's nice and organic and nice and smooth. So what we can do is we can start modeling a little pigeon character out of this cube. It all starts with a cube. And so what I'm going to do is make this cube editable by hitting the C key. Remember, that's the Make Editable button right here, and the shortcut key for that is C. So I'll select my cube, hit C, and now what I can do is I can access the polygons, edges, and points of this model here, okay? So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna select the polygon face. You can see that what we're actually seeing and selecting in the viewport is actually the end result version of the subdivision surface smoothing and subdividing out the geometry, but we're only allowed to select the base amount of polygons that we have here. So if I hit Q, the Q key is an easy way to toggle a generator to be on and off. So I'm just hitting the Q key here. You can see I can only select how many actual polygons exist on the cube on the actual subdivision surface level version of it. So another thing I want to call out is if you're seeing a cage around this versus the rounded version, you are going to be outside of this isoline editing mode. So if I disable this, and sometimes it's easy to accidentally hit Alt and A, which is the shortcut key here. So if I turn this off, you can see that now we have the cage represented in our scene, and we're actually selecting those original edges. So this is an easy way to visualize the cage plus the subdivision smooth version of your model. So by default, in the newer versions of Cinema 4D, or at least the version I'm on right now, isoline editing is turned on. So it's all up to your preference if you like seeing that cage or not. So I'm actually just going to keep that isoline editing off for now, just so we can see what's happening with the original geometry and what we do to the underlying subdivided version there. So if I want to start modeling out and blocking out the pigeon character, if I go and get the model mode here, just because I want to get the doodle tool, I want to create a pretty chunky pigeon here that looks a little bit like this. We have like the little wing here, and then maybe some feathers back here, and big eyes, and a little beaky here, and some stubby little legs. That's my terrible drawing that hopefully the model will look much better than, but that's kind of what I want to do at this point. So I want to block out the basic shapes of this pigeon character. So what I want to do is basically, if I just change the color here, I want to create the basic blobby shape of this pigeon character, and then just kind of build on detail from that point on. So you want to start low poly and basic shapes and model out the basic form, and then start adding in all the little details, like the little neck and head feathers, and then the wing, and then the little back tail feather there. So I'm going to delete this terrible drawing and see if I can model this looking much better than my drawing. I'm going to go back into my polygon mode and make sure to select my cube so I can select the polygons on this cube. I'm also going to hit E for the move tool because I was in my doodle tool there. And the thing I'm going to do to block out that general form of that pigeon body is I can't just stick with a cube. I need to start adding more definition to it and extending out, say, the neck and the tail. And how you can do this is using a bunch of very common modeling commands. And one of the most common modeling commands is the extrude. Now, we have already used the extrude generator before. You have a handle on what the extrude generator does, and the extrude modeling command does a very similar thing. So to get your modeling menu, you're going to hit the M key. And just like we hit the N key to get all the different menus for our viewport outlines and shading and all that stuff, the M key brings up a whole other menu of modeling commands. So I hit M, and then if you look alphabetically all the way down to T, that is the key to hit to get the extrude tool. So if I hit T, you'll see in the attributes manager, I got my extrude tool active. And then to extrude out, I'm going to click on the polygon and drag upwards. And you're going to see that there's my original cage. If I hit Q to disable my subdivision surface, you can see we extruded out, we added a few more polygons, and we have this whole new cap here. And if I hit Q again, you can see that we actually sharpened this edge out here. Actually, the top of this looks like the top of a cylinder or something like that. So one thing to keep in mind is that the closer edges are from one another, if I just move this up, you can see it's getting much more rounded with the subdivision surface. If I move this downwards, this polygon downwards, you can see we're getting a much sharper edge. So the closer your edges are to one another, the sharper your subdivision surface rounding will be. And the further apart your edges are, the rounder this will be. So I can go ahead, and so I've just been moving this up and down the y-axis here. If I want to go ahead and extrude again, I'll hover over and highlight that polygon again and click and drag, and you can see I extruded out another time. So you can see how this looks. I just added a few more levels of a geometry by extruding twice. And then what I can do at this point is hit T to get the scale tool to get out of the extrude tool, and I can scale down this polygon like so, and I can hit the E key to move this up or down, and you can see how I can start to block out this shape. So you can see the underlying geometry there. And what I can do if I want to say select this loop of edges here and maybe move it up some, what I can do is go to my edge mode because I want to select edges. And if I want to select the loop of polygons all around here, all I need to do is double click on one edge and it will select that loop of edges there. And this is really handy because I can go ahead and move this up or down, and I can scale this up or down as well. So we got a little jelly bean looking thing at this point. And now what we can do is the head's looking pretty good. We can go to our polygon mode, maybe scale this down a little bit like so, because again, we're just trying to get the basic form and the basic shape of this chunky pigeon. And what we can do at this point is we can extrude out from the backside here to extrude the tail, okay? So you always want to remember where you're looking by default and what is the tail of your object. So again, if you are going back to your frame default with the x-axis pointing to the right, you want to make sure that you're making the tail behind your character facing the z-axis here. So you always want to make sure you're oriented well in space, because the more you start rotating around, you might think that, oh, I should build the tail this way, and that's actually forward from where our scene default is. So let's go and select the backside of our pigeon. And another way to extrude is to simply select a polygon and hit the Command or Control key down. You'll see those little boxes there on the cursor, and click and drag, and you'll see that is a shortcut key to extrude as well. And so I can easily hold down the Control or Command key and extrude to my heart's content. Now that's way too many extrusions, so I'm going to undo that. And so I'll hold the Command or Control key down and click and drag, and there's my tail. And I'm going to scale this down as well. And then I'll hit the E key to get my move tool again, hit the Command or Control key, and then extrude out one more time, and then T for scale and scale down that polygon. So now we got a little bit of a tail going on here. Maybe we can move this up. Maybe I can go into my edge mode, double click on that edge to get that edge loop and move this up or down, scale this as I want to here. And again, just blocking out the basic shape. So here's the underlying geometry, and here's our nice smooth geometry here as well. And you can see the benefit of using a subdivision surface is that you can work with less geometry underneath here, but then still get a very high res result, okay? So what I'm gonna do now is let's actually select this polygon and this polygon by holding the Shift key down to add to my selection. And I can hit T for scale and scale this out to make this a little bit more of a wide belly of the pigeon. And then I can select this front face and move this out a little bit more, maybe shrink this down. And you can start to see a little bit of our pigeon shape coming to form here. So I can go and get my edge mode, double click, get that loop selection there, scale this down a little bit. And you always want to make sure you are modeling in your 4-up view as well, so you get to see what this looks like in all 4 views. Because what you don't want to do is accidentally select something that's over here and be moving something around and be on this side of the model and not exactly know what's going on. So I'm just going to undo that. So you want to make sure you're always paying attention to what's going on with your model at all times. And if I wanted to select this side, but also select this side as well, instead of manually selecting that side, what I can do is work in symmetry. So if I go to this little butterfly icon here and click that on, you can see that's going to turn on our symmetry plane. And right now, if I go to the gear icon, so just like the gear icon we had with the snapping, we also have the symmetry hub options that we can choose. And we can choose which axes we have activated symmetry on. So right now, I only need the X axis in symmetry, and you can see as I select the one side, it's selecting the other side. So now I only need to select one side and move it versus having to select both sides and adjusting things. So this is a really easy way to kind of adjust everything, and that's looking pretty good. So what we have at this point is very few polygons to manipulate to try to get the exact shape that we want on our pigeon character. So what we actually want to do is get more geometry so we can start adding in even more detail and more resolution. So it's kind of like we are working with a lot of giant pixels. It's like working at 8-bit, and you can only get so much detail at 8-bit. So what you want to do is up the resolution, and you can make more defined pictures, right? So just like images, we can add more definition and more geometry to our basic blocky mesh here to be able to add more details of the pigeon character. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. So right now, if I turn off the subdivision surface, we just have this little block here. So what I'm going to do is generate more geometry off of this by hitting Command or Control A with my polygon mode selected, and I just selected all of my polygons. And now what I want to do is basically, I want to subdivide this one time and bake that in, because this subdivision surface is subdividing this parametrically, which means we are not baking in that subdivision. We can adjust this as we please. But what I want to do is actually bake in a subdivision level of 1 and then still subdivide using this parametric subdivision surface. So what I can do is I can select all these polygons here, and I'll just move this back ever so slightly. Select all these polygons, Command or Control A, and then I can right click. And with those polygons selected, it's going to bring up a whole mess of modeling functions. Now, what I want you to know is that you do not need to know every single one of these functions and what they do. Typically, you only need to learn a few common modeling functions, and that'll get you 90% of the way. Okay. So what we can do is you can see we have a subdivide here, and there's this little gear. You can also see the shortcut keys there as well. So U and then S. So I'm just going to go to this gear icon, and this is where we can adjust the actual subdivide tool options. And so what we want to do is we actually want to subdivide this and add that smoothing in at the same time. So we want to do that smooth subdivision like we're doing with the subdivision surface. And so I'll turn that on. And then the iterations is basically, okay, how many times do you want to subdivide this? And we'll subdivide this at a level of 1. So we'll turn every single polygon here into 4 polygons and then add that smoothing, okay? So if I click OK, you can see what just happened. We just took every single polygon there, turned them into 4 polygons, subdivided them into 4 polygons, and then smoothed them out. And so you can see that basically this is an effect where we were at level 1 of our subdivision surface, but now it's level 0. So now we can go up 1 level and then up another level, and this is even more smooth than it was from the get-go. So that subdivision's baked in that we just did there using that subdivide command. But these subdivisions are not baked in. We can adjust these as we please, okay? But sometimes you need to actually bake in a subdivision level so we can start manipulating all of these other polygons and adding more detail. So that's what we just did. So at this point, we have a lot more polygons and points and edges that we can manipulate. And just selecting polygons and moving them around, even having the symmetry mode on, can be a little bit laborious. So what I like to do at this point is when I have a lot more geometry is start using the sculpting tool. Now, don't be afraid of the sculpting tools. I'm going to find them in the mesh menu here. We're going to go down to sculpt and we're going to go to brushes. And if I highlight the little top area here and highlight it, I can actually tear off that menu, and then I can click and drag the little top area here, and I can actually drag this over to the side and dock this menu with all my sculpting tools into my UI. And I can right click and go to icon size, and I can actually make these icons large so they're easier to see. And now again, don't be discouraged by so many sculpting brushes, because the only ones I'm really going to use are the grab, smooth, and the inflate. Okay, so we have a very chunky pigeon. We're going to inflate a lot because we're gonna have a pretty inflated, bloating looking pigeon. So what I'm gonna do is just show you how these sculpting tools works, even though we're not doing like legit ZBrush sculpting for like very high res characters or anything like that. So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna grab the grab tool, and then what I'm gonna do is you can see with the symmetry on, you can see a dot on the right side here and then a little dot on the other side, and you can see this little circle. Now this is the size of our sculpting brush. You can see the size over here as well. So how I'm adjusting the size on my end is I'm going to click my middle mouse button, and that will adjust the size as well. So if I click and hold on the middle mouse button, that will adjust the size here. And so I'm going to make this fairly big, because what I'm going to do is create some pretty broad brush strokes and click and drag. And you can see how much we can adjust this and have so much control over the actual shape. And I'm just kind of like tweaking this very slightly. And I'll bring up my 4-up view here as well. I accidentally got out of it. But you can adjust this in any view here and get the exact type of profile that you want. Start adjusting things. Maybe the tail goes up a little bit. So I just like a giant brush. And again, just like if you're painting with Bob Ross, you're going to start with those big brushes first and then get those smaller paint brushes and bring in all those details. So this is looking pretty good. Like the shape is starting to shape up like it's looking like a little pigeon character here. So I'm liking this, and this is much easier than going in and if I hit the E key and just go to my polygon mode and like select polygons one by one or selecting points one by one. This is just a nice, easy way to be able to select things and move them around. Now, you'll notice because I have a point selected, or even if you had a polygon or an edge selected, and you start to sculpt, you're only going to affect those selected points, edges, or polygons. So what I'm going to do is deselect all, and the key for that is Controller Command Shift in A, and that will deselect all. That's also up in your select menu here, deselect all. Okay, so now I can go back in and adjust this as I please. And so this is looking pretty good, I would say. Got a nice like little hourglass kind of shape going on. And again, you want to make sure everything's looking good from all angles. So I'm going to make this a little bit wider because we want this to be pretty roundish. So it helps to look from the above view. Again, having a bigger brush with those big broad brush strokes there is very helpful. And you also notice that it doesn't matter what mode I need to be in. I can be in any one of these modes and start sculpting. Again, I need to Control Shift A to deselect that polygon there, but I can sculpt with any of those modes active here. Okay, so I'm just gonna sculpt, make sure this is nice and round and chunky looking, and I think this is looking pretty good at this point. Now, if you want to go ahead and, maybe I want to level out this little edge loop here. So I can double click this edge loop and hit T for scale and just scale this down and hit the Shift key to constrain the increments of 5%. And you can see I can scale that down to 0. And this will be a very flat, perfectly flat edge loop there, which is really nice. So you can see how that works. I can even go on this back end here, double click to select all edges, and hold the Shift key down and just bring this down as well. And I can even go in here and say, you know what? I don't even need this edge. This is like too much detail. Like sometimes you don't need as much detail as you have in your subdivision. So if you want to get rid of an edge loop, what I can do is with that edge loop selected, I can right click and go to dissolve, and that will remove that edge. And so what we can do instead is double click, select this edge loop, and I can actually move this down. And instead of hitting the E key and moving this down and we're getting this kind of weird shape, I'm going to undo that. What I can do is I can actually slide these edges down this mesh by hitting the M key and then going to O, and that is the shortcut key for the slide tool. So I can hit O, and you can see the slide edge tool is active, and I can just slide this up or down. You can see I accidentally deselected the edge loop there. So I'm going to double click again, M, and then O, and then click and drag. And you can see how this is sliding this up and down the surface of the mesh there, which is really cool. I can double click here, and the slide tool is still active, and do that as well. I can do this and adjust this like so as well. So easy way to slide your edges up and down using the slide tool. It's one tool I use quite a bit. And then what I can even do is double click, select this edge, hit the T key for scale, and scale this down to 0 as well. So everything's nice and aligned. I can even select this loop here and hit T for scale and scale this down if I wanted to. And this should be perfectly aligned down the x-axis there. And so everything's looking nice and symmetrical and kind of egg-shaped. And we're using the sculpting tools to help us get there, okay? So now what we can do at this point is we have the body, and let's actually rename everything here. So this is the body, and then we can rename the subdivision surface and name this body SDS, SDS short for subdivision surface. And what we can do at this point is I can hit the Q key, and we can get back to just the underlying geometry that we are subdividing with the subdivision surface. And I can say, you know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to get my polygon selection tool here, and I'm going to create a loop of polygons. And to do that, I'm going to hit U, and U is similar to the M menu here, where the M menu gives you a bunch of modeling commands and the U gives you a bunch of selection commands. So if I hit U, you can see that loop selection is L. So if I hit L, you can see that now I can select a loop of polygons. So I can select this loop and I can say, you know what? I'm going to select this loop and I want to select everything above this loop as well. So instead of manually selecting and adding to our selection, what I can do is use another selection tool, which is the fill tool, which acts like a paint bucket kind of selection. So if I go U and then F for fill selection, you can see that this is, again, acting as if I'm almost like using a paint bucket fill on some polygons. So I got this loop selected. I'm going to hold the shift key down and click here to add to my selection. And you can see I got that whole like head part selected. And then what I can do is actually split this off into its own object. And I could use that for the head with the feathers. Okay. So if you're not following me, let me go and I'll get my model mode, get the doodle tool. I want to create that nice little feathery head part that will have my pigeon head looking on. And it almost looks like the ghost from Pac-Man, but I'll delete that. Go back to my edge mode and go back to my move tool, select the body. And you'll see that actually, even though I went to the doodle tool, went to a completely different tool, Cinema 4D is actually going to store that polygon selection for me, so I don't have to select it again. And so to break this off into its own object, I can right click and go to split. And the shortcut key for that is U and P. So let's actually just go ahead and do that. So U and then P, and you can see what happened in our object manager over here. So if I go to my move tool and I select this body and move this up, you can see, voila, we almost got like a hat going on here. You can see that that axis center is where the axis center of the whole old mesh was, the body mesh. Let me rename this to head. And what I can do is actually recenter this so the axis center's centered to the new mesh here. So I can go to Tools, Axis, Center Axis 2, and you can see now we have that axis center right in the center of the head there. And so what I can do to give this a little bit of thickness, because right now this is literally just a polygon thick. There's no thickness to this head at all. So what I'm going to do is go back to my polygon mode, and I got all my polygons still selected, and I'm going to hit M and then T for extrude again. So instead of just extruding out one polygon, we can actually extrude out multiple polygons. So if I click and drag here, you can see I just added a lot more geometry there and added some thickness going on there by extruding all these polygons out. Now, if I turn back on the subdivision surface, you're going to see that the only objects that's subdivided is this first object here. So what I can do is actually get a whole new subdivision surface and place the head underneath that subdivision surface and rename this head SDS. And now we got our own subdivision surface for the head here. If I go back to polygon mode and hit the Q key, you can see what's going on. Got a little thickness of the neck there. And then what I want to do at this point, let me just get my doodle tool again, is create those little feather pieces here. Okay, so let's delete that awful drawing, go back to polygon mode, select the head. And so what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to select each of these polygons that make up the bottom of that new extruded head object we have there. And I'm going to hit M and then T again and extrude down. But what I actually want to do at this point is I don't want to extrude as a group. I want to not preserve the group. So I'm going to uncheck this and now watch what happens. This is going to extrude each polygon individually. And if I hit the Q key, you can see exactly what's going on there. Got some nice little things happening that almost look like feathers. Let me extrude this out one time and then I'll extrude this out again. And then what I want to do is scale down these polygons that we just created here, right here. So am I hitting the Q key to toggle the subdivision surface on and off? And so if I hit T for scale, it's actually just going to scale down to our axis center. So instead of scaling down like this, what I'm going to do is scale down a different way. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to normal transform and go to normal scale. And then if I click and drag now, you can see this is actually scaling down each polygon. So what is a normal? A normal is basically a polygon face. And there's a thing called normal direction where it's like, what direction is the normal facing? And it's basically a normal is, okay, this polygon here is going to be facing this way. This polygon face here is going to be facing downwards. And this polygon here is going to be facing this way. So basically, Like this one's here, this one's out this way. So a normal is basically just a polygon face. You can have a back normal. So the back of this polygon will be going this way, but the front will be going this way, the opposite direction. So you don't really need to get too geeky about what a normal is, but that is the difference between just scaling down everything as a polygon group and right clicking and going to normal transform and normal scale. It's actually going to scale down on a polygon by polygon face basis. And so now I can hit Q, I can make this a little bit smaller. I can also double click all of these edges here to get these edge loops, and I'm holding the shift key down to add to the selection. And I can try to scale these down. And so you can see that if I try to scale this down, it's going to scale to the center again. So I'm going to undo that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to orientation. Instead of scaling down to the axis center, I'm going to scale down to the normal. And then I'm going to say, yes, scale down along the normals. And so if I go ahead and I hit T for scale and hold down the T key and scale this down, you can see I'm actually scaling all these down similarly to how we were scaling down the normals like we were doing before. So this is looking good. Maybe I want these edges to move up, so I'll hit M and then O for the slide tool and slide all these up. And you can see we're actually sliding in different directions here. So it looks like I'll have to double click each one and slide them up, which is fine because we can actually add some variation in here as well to make it look a little bit more interesting. Like so. You can see that the symmetry tool was on for that, so I'm going to deactivate that, and let's just make sure everything looks good all the way around. You can see this polygon got moved a little bit, and actually, instead of moving polygons, we can just go back into our grab tool, and we can start adjusting all these little polygons here. Like so. And another helpful thing is using the modifier key to turn any of these sculpting tools into the smooth tool. So you can hold the shift key down and this is going to smooth everything out. But that smooth is very strong. It's very heavy handed. So what I like to do is go to the smooth tool itself and bring down the strength to like, let's go 5% of the strength. And then when I use the grab tool and I use that shift modifier key again, it's only 5% of its original strength. And now I can just kind of like tap, 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 and kind of get the smooth that I want. So I can grab, smooth, grab this, smooth, grab this so it's not intersecting the backside there. So smooth. And another thing we can do that's really fun is use the inflate tool. So if I grab the inflate brush and let's turn on symmetry here. And if I start clicking here, you can see this is basically going to inflate this outwards. And just like I used the middle mouse button, moved it up or down, we can actually move this left or right to adjust the size and move this up or down to adjust the pressure here. So middle click and right or left is size, middle click, hold, and up or down is the pressure. So you can see, let's up the pressure here, like so. And I can really start to inflate this. So we're inflating here. Very handy tool. Little feathers there. And so that's looking fairly good. Like so. And we want to remove the intersections there. And you'll see that when you get the sculpting tools, there's a lot of tweaking that you can actually get into here just to get the perfect shaping and model that you want. So what I'm looking at now is making sure that our feathers are not too far out from the body there. So I can duck under here, and I can also turn back on my symmetry and go like that. Smooth. And we'll say that's looking pretty good. And I'm not going to go down the tweak hole and continue tweaking that. So let's start adding more bits of the detail here. And let's actually start out by adding a wing. So let's go and we'll start out with a cube again. And we'll go and bring this over here. And I can access these points because I'm in model mode. If you're in any of these other modes, you won't see those points on this primitive cube. So I'm just going to shape this up like so. We'll throw this in a subdivision surface. Let's rename this wing and rename this wing SDS. And so now we have a little bit more geometry. I'm going to hit C to make this editable. And you can see that we only have this cube. So again, what I'm going to do is go to my polygon tool, select all by hitting Command and Control A, and then right click, and we're going to bake in a level of subdivision. So we're going to make sure our smooth subdivision's on, and now we have more geometry to work with. And so now what I could do, let's turn back on our subdivision surface. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and let's go to our options and turn on isoline editing so we can actually see what's going on and what polygons we're selecting. So we kind of know what the relationship between the cage here and the actual smooth version is by now. So I just like this view. It's a little bit cleaner than what we had before. So I'm going to go, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to extrude these two polygons out to make a little bit of a wing. So I'm going to Command or Control click and drag and go along the Z-axis here. And I'm just going to scale this down and scale it down this way. And you can see I'm actually still in orientation normal. I'm going to bring this back to axis, and you can see now I can move this actually in the same world axis now versus the normal direction, and kind of scale this down. And so there's one wing. I can select this polygon here and this polygon here. Command click and drag this out to extrude and shrink this down. Hopefully you can kind of see what's going on here. You can see that this is a little part of the wing here and then a bigger part of the wing like so. And so at this point we can go and I'll deselect any of those polygons, and I can go back to my sculpting tool and just start sculpting and shaping the wing here as I please. And maybe what I can do at this point is just inflate this one side to make this bloat out a little bit more. So I'll turn off symmetry. Let's grab inflate, and I'll middle click and drag to increase the size. And you can see as I'm just kind of clicking and dragging my mouse, I'm inflating this side of the wing. And I can hold the shift key down and kind of smooth things out again. Then go back to grab and continue shaping. So again, it's important to block out the basic shape of all of your geometry here. And we can actually shape this so it's a little bit more flush to the body here. So it looks like it's bent a little bit. Let's go to our 4-up view. This big, broad brush, which is very helpful with that. Let's inflate one last time. Big, thick wing. And so now what we can do is we've been working with this global symmetry here. And so what we can do at this point is we can actually use symmetry to make a wing on the other side of this pigeon. So to do that, we can actually use a symmetry generator object. And so we can place a generator within a generator. So I can drag and drop this wing subdivision surface underneath the symmetry. And now you can see if I select the wing, go to my model mode, I can make this bigger, I can rotate this, and you can see that those changes are updating on the other side there. So we can kind of position this wherever we want. As we reposition this, we can go back in and use our grab tool and adjust all this stuff as we repositioned it here. You can see how that's updating the symmetry version on the other side, which is nice. We won't worry about the wing kind of intersecting at this point. We can fix that a little bit later. Let's go and inflate this bit right here because it's a little flat. And it's looking pretty good. All right, so we got our wing. Let's rename this wing symmetry. And now we can go for, how about the little tail feathers here? So let's go to the body, and let's go to our polygon mode, and let's select the polygon there, and let's turn on symmetry. And if I hit M and T, you're going to see that I don't want to preserve groups, because if I have this checked on, you can see that it's going to extrude both out and merge them together. But if I unselect that, you can see it's going to break them into separate bits. So that's exactly what I want. So I'm going to extrude out again, hit T for scale and scale this up. And so now we got some pretty big tail feathers here. And we can maybe extrude out once more, like so. You can see that this is getting a little too close to that center mark there. So let me just move this out like this and then extrude out. Then we won't have that weirdness that we had, because if you get too close to that center symmetry there, things can get a little weird. So let's T for scale. So let's hit Q to see what's going on with our polygons. And let's actually hit M and then O to make sure this isn't so kind of stretched out over here. Something weird kind of happened. I can actually just select these polygons individually. And again, you can see how this point is stuck on that side. So we're going to undo. Let's undo all this stuff. And let's make sure this is moved out and extrude once again. And so now we're not having that weird intersection going on, and we can go to our edge mode, double click for a loop selection, and we can just kind of scale these up like so and kind of rotate this out. And we get a little bit something like this. Okay. So you can see that our body is actually pretty low poly still at this point, and that's because our subdivision viewport is at 1. If we change this to 2, now we got a little bit more geometry going on. You can go to our body, go to our grab tool, and start sculpting this a little bit, smooth this out, get rid of that little jank that we saw there, and we can even inflate to make this a little bit thicker. Inflate that bottom there, like so. There we go. And we got our tail. Let me smooth this out a little bit. So let's go and let's get our feet. So let's go and we'll start out with a cube again. Bring this all the way down. And again, you won't see those dots if you are in one of these other modes. You need to be in model mode to see those dots. And then if we place this into a subdivision surface, let's rename this leg and leg SDS. And you can see if I go to my cube primitive, if I up the segments in the Y, you can see what that's doing. Remember, we have the more edges we have, the more sharp the subdivision surface will get. So for our leg, let's actually give a segments of 5. I'll hit C to make this editable. If I go to edge mode, you can see those edges there. If I hit Q to turn off the subdivision surface, you can see all those new lines there. And I can move this last one down. And what I want to do, I want to extrude out here to create some toes. And I only have so many polygons here, so let's go and let's subdivide everything. So I'm going to go select my polygon selection, Command and Control A to select all those polygons, right click, we're going to bake in a subdivide. So click OK. And now you can see what we got going on here. Let's select these polygons here and let's scale this down, holding the shift key to constrain, and we'll just make this a little bit bigger. And right here is where we can kind of extrude out some toes. And I don't want 4 toes, so I'm going to deselect my symmetry and select the polygon right there. So I got 3 polygons selected. I'm going to hit M and then T and extrude out. Again, preserves groups is unchecked, so I can extrude these out. And if I turn on the subdivision surface, you can see we got some little toes sticking out. And if I extrude again, you can see you can make the toes even longer there. And you can see that actually our toes are a little bit small compared to the thickness of our leg. So actually what I can do is hit U and then L to get my loop selection. Select the loop here, and hold the shift key down, add to the selection the loop there, and then hit U and then F and fill in those selections there. And I can right click and go to normal transform, normal scale, and just thicken this up. And maybe hit T for scale to move this, to scale everything up and move this out. And then if I hit Q again, you can see this is looking, pretty good. Now, one thing that really helps, especially when we get like weird indents and stuff like that, is I can go and I can Command or Control A, select all. And if I want to smooth everything out all at once, I can right click and go to iron. The shortcut key for that is M and then G. And so what I can do is just click and drag, and you see this is going to smooth everything out, which is really nice. And I can also even just select these polygons here and then just move them in. And I can even select these polygons and just iron these 2 polygons out. And then I can also go and select all these polygons on the bottom here. So if I hit Q, I just selected all the bottom polygons, and I just want to flatten everything out. So T for scale, hold the shift key down to constrain to 5 degrees and flatten out the bottom. And I can even grab my grab tool, Command or Control Shift A to deselect all, and then just move these polygons in and out, and even use the Shift key to smooth everything out. And hit Q and see what we got. And that's looking pretty good. We can hit U and then L to get that loop selection, and then U and an F to select these, and just kind of move this on up. And then we can even just scale everything all up, and we can rotate this foot into place. So we got one foot, but we need another foot. So that is where we can use another symmetry object. So let's go to our generators menu, symmetry, put the leg underneath the symmetry, and this is our leg symmetry. And there we go, looking good. So we got the body, we got the wings, we got the head. We just need the face. So let's go and let's add a cube for the beak. Put this in place really quick. And this is, you're kind of getting the hang of this, where we start out, we block everything out with a simple shape, make it editable, throw it in a subdivision surface. This is beak, SDS, and this is beak. And again, we're going to just kind of block everything out, and we are going to bake in a level of subdivision here. So go to polygon mode, select all, Control or Command A, and then right click, subdivide. So now we got more subdivisions here, and now we can go and we'll use the grab tool this time, make sure our symmetry is on with X. Make this a little bit bigger. And we can just shape the beak here. So again, it helps to be in your 4-up view as well. See how pointy your beak is. Something like that. And so now I can just select this, rotate it if I want to, and just kind of place it wherever I want. And let's get some eyes. So let's just create a sphere, rename it Iris, and let's position this into place. So we'll move it forward. And if you know me and you've seen my characters before, I like giant eyeballs. So I'm actually going to change the type of subdivision here to hexahedron, and we'll just move this into place. And I will kind of shrink this down in the Z to flatten it out a little bit. And then let's actually up the segments here to make this not so chunky. So we'll up the segments, and then I will command click and drag to duplicate the iris, and this will be the pupil. Move this forward, shrink this down. And so you see there's a lot of subdivisions here. There's actually another viewing mode that we can see all of these subdivisions from, and where we can only really see the subdivisions coming from the rounded out geometry underneath here. And that is if we go to display and we go to isoparms, you can see how that just kind of cleaned everything up. And what it's doing is it's just showing us the nice smooth rounded out edges and polygons that are from our base geometry here. So there's the base geometry. We're just seeing the result of that. And we're not seeing, if we go back to wireframe, we're not seeing all the other subdivision generated edges there. So it just cleans everything up a little bit if we go to isoparms. So that's NI, so N and then I. And if we ever need to go back to wireframe, it's NH, so NH and I. So it's like hi, but with the N in front of it. So there we go. Let's actually group these two pupil and irises together. So I'll hit Alt or Option G, and this will be I. And now we can rotate these both like so. And now we can go and add symmetry to this. And so what I'll do is grab a symmetry object, throw this in the symmetry, and rename this I. And yes, the elephant in the room, or the pigeon eye in the room, is what is going on over here. And what it's doing with the symmetry object is it's kind of baking everything down and applying a weird scale to it because we adjusted this scale and it's just kind of not matching up like that on the other side. So all we need to do is just change in the object tab, we just need to change this to keep it parametric. And so it won't bake it down into a piece of geometry. It will keep it parametric. It will keep these parametric spheres instead of, basically making it editable like that. So we'll undo that. And so now we got our eyes and our beak. And let's actually hit N and then A to get out of our garage shading with lines. Now we just have our original geometry. And so I think after putting the eyes on here and the beak, I think what I want to do is kind of tweak things a little bit. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the head up. And you can see if I select the head in the viewport, it's actually going to select the subdivision surface. The subdivision surface's axis center is right down here. But if I want to select the head and move this along this axis and scale along this axis, all I got to do is select the object and then double click, and that will select the object, the child object underneath. And so now I can move this up, shrink this down a little bit, maybe move this forward. So I'm just kind of shrinking the head a little bit. And then what I can do is, let's actually think of what I want to do is add a little bit more of like a curve to the head. So let's go and delete that awful drawing. And we could do one of two things. We can just try to go to the head, go to the grab tool, and start to shape this. And again, making sure symmetry is on, and try to shape this with the low amount of polygons that we have available to us. Or we can go ahead and we could subdivide this even further. So in the head, I can add more geometry to give me more detail that I can start sculpting more fine-tuned like curves and stuff like that, okay? So let's select the head. Let's go to polygon mode, Command and Control A to select all. I'm gonna right click outside of this area here and go to subdivide. So now you can see we have a lot more geometry to deal with. And now we can get this nice little like indent there. And so actually what would be helpful, I'm just going to undo all that, is if I make a change on the front, it also mirrors on the back. So what I can do is go to my symmetry hub, turn on Z. You can see we got the Z plane now. So now I can update the head here. And it's not only going to mirror in the X, but the Z as well. So you can see what's going on there. I'll hit Shift to smooth everything out. And now what we might have to do is adjust the actual body and sculpt that a little bit too, depending on what we do with the head here. You can see what's going on there. I'm liking the shape of the head better. Let's go to our 4-up mode, make sure everything looks good. Let's actually shrink this down in the Y here. And we can actually select all, right click, and use that iron again, kind of smooth everything out. We can also thicken everything by going to normal transform and normal scale. So just gonna thicken everything up. Go to grab, hold the shift key down, smooth everything. And now let's see what this looks like if we reposition the eyes and the beak. Go to model mode and move this forward. So I'm kind of digging this better. Maybe I'll move everything down. I'll just select everything and move it down. Let's see if we can work with this. So since we changed the head and everything, we have to go and change the body as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So I got the body selected. Go to polygon mode and let's actually go and inflate. And let's give this pigeon a little bit more of a belly. So I'm going to go in. I don't need the Z symmetry on, so just the X. And let's just inflate that belly a little bit, like so. Looking good. And then for this, we can actually deflate by holding the control key down. So if I hit the control key and hold it down, I'm deflating. And I can hold the shift key to, again, smooth. See what that looks like. Let's go back to the head and let's actually inflate the feathers here because they're getting kind of scrawny. Let's see what's going on there. That's looking much, much better. And use the smooth, just kind of smooth everything out. Let's get a really big brush. Smooth everything out. We get the grab tool. A little grabby with the feathers here. And again, we're just trying to make these back feathers kind of flush with the back of the body here. And maybe we'll inflate again. And so you can see it's a little bit of push and pull, or inflate and deflate and grab. And it's nice to use these sculpting tools because you can kind of make these big adjustments pretty easily, especially with symmetry on, and get things looking pretty nice, pretty fast. Okay, so I think that's looking pretty good. Let's scale up the head a little bit more. If I were actually doing this for a client or something, I'd probably like adjust and really get more fine detail in here, but that would be boring to watch. So just to know that, like, you know, once you start subdividing things, this is where it's beneficial to have all these extra subdivisions, because then you can really start shaping things to look the way you want. But it is very important that when you do actually block everything out, that you do it very low poly, so you don't have to start from scratch and have all this huge amount of detail from the get-go and be molding everything from a, you know, pretty bad starting point. I told you I wasn't going to have you sit through all this, but I did anyways. I'm sorry. But yeah, I mean, it's good to see people's workflows and how neurotic someone might be with sculpting and modeling. But like I said, it's a little bit of push and pull. And since we just remodeled everything, move these eyes out. Oh yeah, I'm definitely digging how this is looking now. Let's move the beak out. Now the beak is closed at this point. I think the finishing touch we can add for our little Pidgey character here is we can go and we can add a little smile here. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I select the beak, go to my edge mode, you can see we got this little slit here. And if I select this edge and this edge, again, we got mirror on, so it's going to select that edge as well. What I can do is hit M. Then we're going to use a new tool that is very commonly used in modeling, and that is the bevel tool. If you look all the way down, it's S is the shortcut key, so S. And if I bevel this, you can see that I just split that one edge into two. We're just going to make this pretty small. And at this point, what I can do is I can select these new polygons that we made. I'm just going to manually select these two edges there. And then I'm going to extrude these in. So M and then T for extrude. And I'm going to make sure I have preserve groups turned on, because if I don't, this is going to extrude both of these inwards, and they're going to be extruding all these polygons separately. So I'm going to turn groups on, and now this is going to extrude inwards like so. And I can hit T for scale, scale this down, and go back to my edge mode and scale this down as well. And now we got this nice little mouth we got going on. And so we can go to the grab tool, and what kind of pigeon do we got? Do we got a happy pigeon or sad pigeon? I have too much fun with this stuff. I think I'm going to have a happy pigeon. It's a happy day. We are learning how to model, and we are, you know, modeling is not easy. Modeling is, you know, pretty rough to get your head around, but this pigeon is very proud of you. Look at how proud he is of you doing all this work so far. So let's just, you know, again, I'm not gonna tweak this. I'm not gonna tweak this, but we got our pigeon, got our beak. Let's go, and I'm just gonna hit E to get the move tool and just kind of rotate this up like so. Just the eyes. And it might also be helpful too, as you are modeling, to maybe even throw on some like basic dummy materials. Not dummy materials, the materials aren't dumb. But especially for the eyes, what we can do is go and I can just double click in this material manager and just make some basic material. So get white for the eyes and then command click and drag to duplicate that. And I'll just change this to black and throw this on the pupil. And so this is just easier adding that little bit of contrast there. And what happened with my beak? The beak just, let's go to the beak and actually I have some odd rotation in there. So I'm going to zero all the rotation out and make sure I'm just rotating this upwards like so. Okay, because the beak looked a little weird there for a second, but that's okay. And so one last thing we can add is that little, what is that? That little thing that is on pigeons. It's like an upside down mustache or a little, it's not called a giblet, but I want to call it a giblet. Let's call it upside down's mustache or a giblet. I don't know, but let's make that really quick. And this is going to be very easy. So we're going to get subdivision surface and we're going to throw the cube in there. We're just going to move this forward, shrink this down, zoop, make this a little longer. And then remember how, let's go to Garage Shading with Lines. Remember how we can add a segment? We're going to add one segment and we're going to make this editable. And at this point, we can go to our edge mode, double click on that edge to get a loop. And I can just move this up, hit Command or Control A to select all, scale this all down, just move this into place like so. We got the little giblet. Now, how do you spell giblet? Giblet. I don't know. Giblet. SDS or upside down mustache. It's whatever you want it to be. And so with this, we can even command click and drag, get a new material. And again, this is just for blocking things out. Beak, there's the beak, and kind of see what everything's looking like. So let's begin modeling our keyboard and computer setup. And how we'll begin is just by modeling a single key and get our feet wet with some hard surface modeling. And it's very similar to organic modeling in that you want to block out everything with a basic shape, say like a cube, and then you'll use a subdivision surface to smooth things out and add details. So we got a cube here. Let's go ahead and make that editable by hitting the C key, and then let's rename this key. And now a chunky keyboard key usually has a tapered top. So what we can do is go to our polygon mode here, click that top polygon, hit T for scale, and just scale this down. And move this down. I hit the E key and just move this down using the move tool and, something like that. So we got our basic blocked out shape. And now what we can do is throw this in a subdivision surface and add some nice smooth edges. So let's go and add the key object to the subdivision surface. You can see that basically what we have now is a squashed sphere. So let me rename this key SDS. And at this point, what we got to do is we got to sharpen up those edges. And remember that the closer two edges are to one another, the sharper that edge is going to be when it's subdivided with the subdivision surface. So one easy way to add more edges is using what's called the loop cut tool. So if I hit M and then go all the way to L, you can see the loop / path cut tool. So I'll hit L and you can see that we have our loop path cut options over here. And you can see as I hover over my object, you can see that it's going to create a cut that's going to loop all the way around our edge, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to demonstrate by sharpening up a single corner here. So if I go in here and I just click right there, you can see we added this extra edge that's highlighted in yellow. And you can see how we have this nice sharp edge now here. So let's actually see what's going on. Let's go to Garage Shading with Lines. Then I'm also going to go down to isoparms. And remember, isoparms is basically just seeing the results of the original edges, but then they're just smoothed out by the subdivision surface here. So you can see that original edge. And if I want to sharpen up this corner, I'll click right there. And you can see in this corner right here, we almost have like a perfect square, which is kind of what you want to do when you're modeling nice round edges. So you can see that this edge here is perfectly sharp. And this edge over here that has none of those edge cuts, which is also called control cuts because they kind of control the edge sharpness. And you can see what that looks like. So another thing I can do is let's actually create like almost like a little cube right here as far as cuts go. And I'll cut right there. And now you can see this side is nice in almost like a rounded cube. And this side over here with no rounding at all, this corner right here is perfectly round. So you can see the difference between an edge with control cuts and one without any at all. So let's go and let's complete this by clicking here, here, and let me hit Q to see which edge we have not cut yet. And it's this one right here. So I'll hit Q again and we'll cut. So it might be a little finicky where this edge shows up. So we just zoom in here and right there. So yeah, something weird. I just kind of moved my view and now I can easily select that and cut. And now you can see we have these nice cut edges. And if I hit Q, you can see how we have that nice rounded edge to our keyboard key, which is exactly what we want, right? So let me go ahead, and I know we did all that work. I want to show you a much easier way to do this, because if you're just cutting things all willy-nilly, like you don't know if everything is kind of like the cut here and the cut here is going to be equidistant from the center here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to still be in my loop path cut tool here, and I'm going to hold the shift key down. And when you hold the shift key down, you can see these dots, and the loop is going to snap to these dots. Now, this will also allow you to snap to the center here. So if I go and I click, you can see I have this cut down the middle. And then what I can do is actually bevel this edge and have it split to either side. So let me get my bevel tool. So I'll hit M and then S for bevel. And then I'll just double click that loop again. And actually I'm in polygon mode, so let me go to edge mode and double click that loop. And with that loop selected, I'm going to click and drag. And you can see that we are splitting that loop into two cuts, and you can see how that's working. Now you'll see that it's equidistant from the top, but you can see on the bottom here, it's not kind of adapting that little taper there. So one thing we can do is change this from fixed distance to proportional. And when you do that, you can up this offset, and this offsets a percentage of the width or height here. So let's go to about like 90. I'll enter in 90 there. And so now we have an edge here and an edge here that are perfectly spaced from the center. So let me go ahead and hit ML again, and I'll hold the shift key down and I'll cut right here, and I'll get my bevel tool by hitting M and then S, double click that edge to get the full loop, and then click and drag. And you can see that proportional is still on. We can enter in 90 there, and then ML to get our loop cut, hold the shift key down, cut there, MS, double click, click and drag, enter in 90 in the offset. And so you can see that with just a few cuts there and a bevel, we have nice perfectly spaced edges along our key here. And so you can see that now we have almost like a perfect cube. Let me get my doodle tool here. Almost like a perfect cube represented right here. And this will make for a super nice rounded edge there. So if I turn the subdivision surface on, you can see our end result. I'll hit Q to deactivate the subdivision surface, and then I'll double click to grab this edge loop and then hold the shift key down and then double click again and add this edge loop to my current selection. Now, one thing I want to show you, I'll hit M and then O for the slide, and you can see, let me hit the Q key. You can see as we slide these loops up and down, how that's changing the sharpness of those edges. So I just wanted to show you and demonstrate how the spacing of these edges. You can see that this edge slide tool is not going to work with me here. So let me just select this edge and select this edge separately. And you can see how we're getting a much more rounded edge. And it's all because of the distance of these edges to one another. So let me go ahead and undo all those slides that I did. And there we go. We got a nice rounded key. So at this point, we need to, let me get to the front here. Remember, the front is where X is facing to the right. What we need to do is, let me go to the profile here. We need to create that nice little indent that is on typical keyboard keys. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to grab the key. Let's go to edge mode here, and I'm going to make a cut right down the middle again. So M and then L to get my loop cut. Hold the shift key and click to add that cut right down the center. And then what I can do at this point, if I hit the E key and go to my rectangular selection by hitting 0, rectangular selections right here too, make sure I'm in edge mode, and I'm going to bring up my 4-up view. And if I select all of these edges right here. So if you see, I'm adding this top edge and then this little bit right here on either side. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna move this down. I'll hit the Q key to turn on subdivision surface, and you can see we're adding that nice little indent there. So something like that. Now at this point, what if you wanted to control what this curve is like? To do that, you will need more than just one cut, because at this point, this is all of the type of curve you can get just with this one loop. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit E and double click this one edge to get the full loop. And then what I'm gonna do, if I go to my perspective view, bring it up full, I'm gonna hit M and then S to get my bevel tool again, and then click and drag. And over here, you can see that we can actually up the subdivision and we can actually subdivide this bevel even more. So if I adjust this offset, you can see if I hit Q that we just added a few more edges there, and you can adjust that using this subdivide right here. Now we don't need too many, maybe about 3. And then the cool thing about this is we can adjust this depth to get exactly, let me actually bring this out even more, to get exactly the type of curve that we want. If I go to profile here, you can change this depth. And this is looking pretty good. So a slight little indent there. And if I hit Q to turn on the subdivision surface, you can see that end result right there looking really, really nice. Now, our key's done. Let's go and duplicate this to create a few more keys. So instead of just command clicking and dragging and creating a duplicate like that, what I'm gonna do is create an instance based off of this key. And remember what instances do. If I go and grab an instance with that subdivision surface selected, I'll go down to instance, and that instance with that subdivision surface selected is going to now reference that subdivision surface object. So if I go and I move this to the side here, you can see that if I go back to my key and I'm like, you know what, maybe my key, maybe this top, I need to taper it even more or less, I can go to my polygon mode. Let's actually go to our front view here, hit 0 to get a rectangular selection, and I can increase the size or shrink it. And remember, everything that we do to this original object, the instance is going to reflect those changes and update accordingly. Okay, so that's an important reason why if you have an object and you're gonna make duplicates of it, but you want the flexibility to change it later, to use an instance here. So I can go ahead and let's command click and drag, hold the shift key down to constrain to increments of 5 centimeters. And let's move another one over here to this side. So I just want to make sure that these gaps in the center here are kind of evenly spaced out. That's looking good. And so at this point, what I'll do is let's create a tab key, which is just a key that is a little bit longer than the typical letter and number keys. So I'm going to command click and drag, bring this down. And again, make sure that the space here, the gap here is equal to the gap there, just eyeballing it. And now this is an instant, but the cool thing about instances is I can hit C to make this editable. And I basically just collapse this down into a copy of the original object that's a subdivision surface and the original object. So let me rename this tab key and then rename this tab key SDS. And then at this point, I can go to my polygon mode, go to the tab key, and let me go to my top view, and I'm just gonna select these polygons here, and then just move them down. And so then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to edge mode, and I'm gonna double click these edges here, because we really don't need them. The tab key really doesn't indent like the typical number and letter keys. So to get rid of these edge loops, I'm just gonna right click and go to dissolve. And the shortcut key for that is M and N. So let's do that, M and then N. And so you can see that those edges are gone. We don't have that little indent on this tab key, but we have this nice rounded tab key. So now at this point, we can go and command click and drag, duplicate this, and let's create a space bar from this tab key. And so this is really easy because all we need to do is basically grab our key here and rename this space bar and space bar. I guess you never name the space bar and designate it as a key, but it is a key, so space bar key. And then go to your polygon mode, select this object, and I'll hit 0, and we'll just select these polygons right here, and I'll move these all the way down. I'm gonna give some space for like a return key over here, so I'll just bring this out like so, and there we go. We got our space bar, we got our tab, and a bunch of keys. Now let's go and grab one of the key instances here and command click and drag, and I'll just move this down like so, and you can use these different views to kind of align these up perfectly. It looks like the same spaces between here and here, but we need to maybe close the gap there a little bit there. And close the gap there. And I'll select this key, command click and drag, hold the shift key down, and move this down a little bit. Like so. And then the only gap we have left, if I grab my doodle tool here, is the return key right here. And I cannot draw a straight line to save my life, but that's what we're gonna be doing. So to do that, let's actually grab our spacebar key and let's command click and drag to duplicate that whole setup, and we'll rename this return key SDS, return key. And now what I can do is grab my move tool, and basically I can just hit 0 to get my rectangular selection, move this down, select all these polygons, move it up, and again, aligning so they're kind of flush there. And then at this point, what I need to do is extrude up to get that top bit there. So to do that, if I hit the Q key, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna create a cut like right here, and then extrude up all these polygon faces. So we'll create a cut like so, and then extrude out like this. And again, I can't draw a straight line. I'm trying over here. Let's go and let's get our polygon selection, select our return key, and then hit M and then L to get our loop cut. And I'll just hold the shift key down. And let's actually just go and let's actually use this view. And we'll cut right about here, okay? And we're still in polygon mode. I can go and select all these edges, hold the shift key down, make sure you don't accidentally move the polygons like I just did there. So select all these polygons. I'm gonna command or control click and drag along this Z-axis. And remember, command click and dragging an axis is a way to extrude as well. And then we're just gonna go and make sure that this edge is nice and aligned in this view right here. So that's looking good. So we got something like that. If I hit the Q key, you can see that this rounding is not great. So if you look, we need to create those support cuts like right about here, here, and then here, and then here. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So I'll hit M and then L. And if I go and hold the shift key down, I can create a cut right there in the middle, go to my edge mode, hit E, double click to select that edge loop, and then extrude these out. And remember, we're using the subdivision here, so I'm just gonna bring that down to 0. And basically what we're doing is just what we were doing before, is splitting that one edge into multiple edges, like so, and making sure they're equidistant. And actually we don't need this edge that's left over, so I'm gonna go and double click to select that edge loop and go and dissolve. I think I did that accidentally, but if you do that accidentally, that's how you can fix that. And so what we can do here is hit M and then L, and then create a loop cut right here. And I'll turn on the subdivision surface so you can see what's going on as we're cutting. And so cut right there. And so you can see that now we have these nice rounded edges going on here and looking really nice. So you can see that basically we just have all these nice little cubes along all these edges. Now, one thing I really don't need is this loop right here and this loop right here, because watch what happens when I dissolve these edges. They're not actually doing anything to the actual shapes. Let me right click and dissolve. And you can see that if I go back and forth, you can see that it's really not changing the overall shape of our object. There's just kind of extra edges. And so when you find out that you actually have extra edges that aren't doing anything, it's probably a good idea just get rid of them, okay? Get those lazy edges out of here. They're not doing anything, right? So now we have our nice return key, and everything's looking really nice. Now, one thing I want to show you, that if you wanted to make these edges even rounder, what you could do is you can select this key here. Remember, this key is instanced many times. And say I wanted to round these edges out even more. I can go and double click this edge here, hold the shift key down, double click that edge to add to selection, double click, add that edge to selection, double click, add that edge to selection. And what I'm going to do with those edges selected, I'm going to go to my subdivision surface, turn it on by hitting Q, and then I'm going to right click, and go to iron. And what this is going to do is going to round out the edges of this key and then all of the instances as well. So you can kind of see like, do you like a more rounded edge like that or not? And basically, if I turn off the subdivision surface, you can see we're basically just kind of shrinking down those edges there. So maybe you like that, maybe you don't, but I'll go in and hit the E key and select these edges here. M and then G to get iron, and then round that edge. We'll go to our space bar. Do the same thing here. So the nice thing is that we are working with limited edges here, so we can make these changes and have some nice resulting smooth geometry. So all I got to do is go and round the edges of this return key. So I'll select this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge, and this last edge, MG. We'll round that out. So everything's nice and rounded as far as the edges go. And at this point, we can go ahead and create the little actual keyboard base. So let's go in, let's first select all these objects, and let's kind of try to center these right down the center here. So like so. The one thing we'll actually need to do as well is space these keys out so that there's not a gap right here, of course. So let's just space these out a little bit. So something like that. So one thing we can actually do is you can see there's this big gap right here. So what we can do is grab the return key. You can see the axis centers right here too. So remember, the way to snap that axis center to the boundaries of the actual geometry is to go to Tools, Axis, Center Axis 2, and we'll just move this over. Like this, move this down, this key down. Maybe we can even spread these out a little bit as well. And maybe I can grab this tab key, hit 0, get this selection, just move this in, and then we'll adjust the spacebar key and just move, again, using this view right here, the front view, will help us align the edges to the other edges there. And I think everything's nice and aligned, looking good. Everything's nice and centered. And at this point we can go, let's select all these objects by clicking and dragging to get a rectangular selection. And let's group these together by hitting Alt or Option G. And this is our keyboard keys. And then at this point I can grab a cube, make this a little bigger, like so. And this will kind of be the actual like base of our keyboard key. So let's go keyboard base. And so what we can do is what we did this entire time is basically blocking out the shape and then making this editable, throwing this in a subdivision surface, rename this keyboard base SDS. And you can see that we're stuck with like a little cube. So what I want to do is I want to hide the keyboard key. So I'm just going to click this top dot until it turns red, and I'm just going to hide this from view really quickly. And so you can see we have this flat, mushy biscuit looking thing. And if I hit M and then L, you can see what we're going to do is basically the same thing as we did before. If I go to my edge mode, I'm going to hold the shift key down, make a cut, hit the E key, double click that edge loop, hit M and then S to get our bevel. And then let's go and see what kind of percent we should use. Maybe 95 is pretty good. I got it right there. Let's actually get rid of that depth of 200, because remember we used that depth for the little indent in the key. We don't need that depth anymore. And so M and then L to get another cut here, holding the shift key down and then hitting E, double clicking that edge loop, MS to bevel. Remember, we'll do 95, so I'll just enter that in. And so now we got this nice rounded brick. Let's do this one more time, M and L, and we'll create that edge loop there. Double click, MS, and this we'll kind of have to eyeball because we want, remember, that perfect kind of cube looking thing in the corner. So that's looking pretty good. And if I hit Q, you can see what we got, okay? So Q got a nice rounded rectangle. And now at this point, If I turn back on the keyboard keys by just clicking that dot so it goes back to its default gray, you can see that we basically need to create like a little well where the keys can kind of sink in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my polygon mode and select these polygons here. I'm going to command click and drag and highlight this y-axis and extrude downwards. And I'm going to hit the Q key so you can see what's going on. You can see actually this is a little bit too much of a well there. So what I'm going to do is actually make some more cuts here like so that the well is this smaller rectangle like right here. And again, it's not like I've had that much coffee, but I can't do it. So let's go keyboard base. Let's go to our edge mode here and hit M and L to get our loop cut. And actually, since I already have this existing edge, I can just double click this edge and hit M and then S and bevel this out. And so I'll have these edges just kind of align to the edges of our keys. And again, I already have an existing edge here as well. So I'll hit E to get my move tool, double click on this loop, M and then S, and we'll just line that up like so. And so now what we can do is select these polygon faces here and then Command or Control click and extrude downwards. And you can see now we have this well that is pretty flush with the keyboard keys here. And actually I can go to my top view here and actually hit the 0 key and select these edges and shrink them down like so in the X just to make sure these are a little bit more flush. And you can see that I actually have to realign and recenter these keyboard keys here as well, like so. And so that's actually looking pretty good. We got this keyboard well. You move these up, actually select these polygons here and move them. Actually, they're pretty flush to the bottom of those keys, looking good. And so now if I turn back on that subdivision surface and I hide the keyboard keys again, you can see that we have this like almost like a soap dish looking thing. So remember, we need to add more cuts to sharpen up these edges, okay? So what I'm gonna do is, I already got these cuts here. I'm gonna double click that edge, M and S for bevel, and I'll just hit Q to turn on the subdivision surface. But you can see as I make that extra cut there, it's sharpening this edge here. And I'll do the same thing here by hitting the E key, double clicking to get this edge loop and hitting M and then S. And you can see we're sharpening this edge as well. So I'll just adjust this like so. And so you can see what's going on there. So we just sharpen those corners. And then another thing we can do is add another cut here and then here to sharpen the bottom here as well. So M and then L, click, and then click. And you can see how we got this nice rounded edge. We'll also need to add another cut here and here to tighten up those edges. So M and L, cut, and cut. And so you can see the cuts that we did there. And you can see that this edge right here and this edge right here, we can probably shrink these down. So they're a little, we want equidistance between this edge and this edge. So this is a perfectly nice round edge. You can see if we make this a little too sharp, the sharpness looks weird there. So hit the Q key and we'll just space those evenly. Grab these edges, scale these edges down, and you can see I can grab these two edge loops, and we did not cut these uniformly from the center. So if we wanted to, we could always go and just zero these out on the Z axis, and this will then center these selected edges up, center them to 0 centimeters in Z. And so those are nice and aligned. So everything's looking really nice. Another thing we can do is add one loop cut here to sharpen this edge. So what I'm going to do is actually hold the Shift key down, center that up, hit E to get the move tool, double click to get the loop selection, MS, and we'll kind of grow those out. And so you can see how we have this nice sharp edge. Now, looks like I added an extra loop there unnecessarily. So I'll double click and dissolve. And that's pretty easy. It almost looks like a Nintendo Switch screen. But if I go and turn back on my keyboard keys, there you go. We got our keyboard. Now, what we can do is I can go to my right view or my front view. It doesn't really matter. And I can go and get my edge mode and hit 0 to get my rectangular selection. And I can move these down here and kind of recenter this up. Now, this little extra edge here, usually you would get rid of it unless you actually had a purpose for it. And I do have a purpose for this edge because what I can do is kind of make a nice little indent on this keyboard. So what I'm going to do with this loop selected, I'll hit M and then S to bevel. And then actually you can see that extra loop, and why that loop's happening is because I have a subdivision on here. So I'm just going to bring that to 0. And you can see that that's going to get rid of that extra loop there. So that's what was going on before. So just make sure you are aware of the number that's in here, because you could create a lot more cuts in there than you want, but I don't need any more cuts. I just want to split that edge into 2. And now at this point, I can go to my polygon selection, hit U and then L to get my loop selection here, and select that loop edge. And then what I'm going to do is introduce you to a new, very common modeling command, and that is inset or inner extrude. And that shortcut key is M and W. So W is inset. It's all the way at the bottom there. So inset, what that does is it basically creates a nice little inset there. But what I want to do is actually want to join these edges. So I'm going to crank up this maximum angle to 91, and that'll join that. And so basically I have this extra edge in the middle here. And what I can do at this point, if I hit the Q key, is hit M and then T for extrude, and just extrude in, create that nice crease, and then extrude again to get that nice loop. And so now we have this nice little indent there. And if we wanted to maybe grow this and make it a little bit thicker, what we could do is let's get the front view big and hit 0 to get our rectangular selection. Select all those polygons, so I'm still in polygon mode, and I can just hit T and I can just make this as tall as I want. Okay, something like that. And so you can see we have this nice crease here on our keyboard base that's looking really, really nice. So let's go and turn off our garage shading so we can see the result here. You can see this edge is pretty sharp. So let's go in and let's actually select. You can see there's 2 edges here really close together. So I'm going to double click to get that loop. Hold the shift key down, double click to get that loop, and then hit M and then O for the slide tool. And if I hit Q key, I can slide these loops, and you can see we can get a much nice rounder edge going on there. And I can even get this polygon loop and right click, go to normal transform, normal move, and I can move this in and out so we can adjust the depth of that. And I think that's looking really nice, actually. Really nice prominent little crease there. Just a little detail goes a long way, I think. And again, we can even go to the top view and go to our rectangular selection, select these edges here, these edges here, and shrink these down so everything's a little bit more flush to those keyboard keys. And I think that's looking pretty nice. So what if you wanted to add like a nice little slant? What you can do for that is you can actually model things using something called deformers, okay? So deformers are these little menus here, and we'll get into deformers much more throughout this course. But what I want to do is just show you the basics of what a deformer does. So here I have my deformers here. You can bend objects, you can bulge objects, you can taper objects. So we could actually have used a taper to taper our keys versus actually modeling in and scaling down the top polygon face here. But the one thing I want to use is something called an FFT, and this is a free-form deformer, okay? So what this allows you to do, if you add this to your scene, you can see this is basically just a little cage. Let me actually just center everything up here. I'm just gonna select both those objects and zero everything out so everything's nice and centered in our scene here, and then go to my FFD. And at this point, to have an FFD, to have any deformer act upon another object, you need to make it a child of the object that you want to deform. So it's opposite of a generator, where an FFD will actually come after and be a child of the object we want to deform. So there's our freeform deformer. We're going to go and make sure that this grid size, this little bounding box, is big enough to encapsulate our entire object here. So it's helpful to have all of your views up to make sure that this is nice and aligned here. And so you want to make sure that all of the keyboard base is within this FFD. And now you can see that the FFD has these basically loop cuts, these edge cuts here. And if I go to point mode, what you can see is if I select one of these points and I move this up or down, or if I select these points over here, getting a rectangular selection and select these points, I can move these up or down and I can actually deform my model non-destructively, which means I'm not actually baking in that bend or anything like that. And I can turn this on or off and you can see with deformation and without. And so this is a really cool way using deformers as a way to model parametrically. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. And so if I wanted to create like a nice little taper, and if I want to know where the front of my object is, this is the front because X is facing to the right. So let's go to our right view here. And you can see these back points are selected. And I can select this point right here, move this up, move this point up. We can almost get like a nice little slant going like so. And so we can maybe even go here, shrink this down, make sure that this edge right here is nice and flush. Select all these points, move this down. And so we're just adding this nice little slant to our keyboard key. And at this point, we can go and rotate our keys to be slanted as well. There's just a subtle little slant going on there. And so you can see what that looks like with and without. So we'll slant these keys even more. So this just looks a lot better. Now to hide that little FFD cage, all we need to do is just like when we wanted to hide our keyboard keys from our view, we can just double click that top dot till it turns red, and that will hide that FFD. And now we have our nice tapered little keyboard model. All right, so let's do this whole workflow again to model a monitor, and you'll start to see the whole technique of modeling, whether it's organic or hard surface. It all starts with a cube, all starts with adding cuts and definition and throwing in a subdivision surface and continuing to add support loops and cuts to round out the form. So start with a cube, double click to make it editable, name this monitor, and let's make that editable by hitting C. And we're just gonna block out the basic shape here. And so just like with the pigeon, we're gonna go and extrude up this part here. But first we're gonna make an edge cut. So M and then L, and we'll do a edge loop cut here. And we'll go to our polygon mode, Command or Control, click and drag to extrude this up. And what we can do is start to make like the nice round profile of a monitor like so. And so actually we could use this drawing we just made, even though it's a terrible drawing, as a guide. So I'll go back to my edge mode here and I'll select this edge, and you can see that the axis is kind of off kilter. So if I go to my world coordinate system, it's going to snap to the world coordinate system, and the shortcut key for that is W. So it's easy to accidentally have that on. So if your axis is weird or whatever and you want to know why that is, it might be because you have the world coordinate system either on or off by accidentally hitting W. So I'm going to go and just move this down. And let's actually, before I do that, let me create another cut here. So M and then L, create a cut there. And so now what I can do is I can have more control over matching this curve. So if I go and just move this down, you can see what's going on there. I can move this curve up, and I can start creating more loop cuts to try to follow this profile. So M and then L, we'll add another cut here. And so we can move this edge down and grab this edge right here and move this down as well. So we're just basically blocking out the shape. Let me double click to select this whole loop, and looks like I didn't get this edge right here. So I'll hold the shift key down, select that, and we're just going to move this down. You can see how much more rounder that is. So this is looking pretty good. And so it's important to block out your basic shape, and we'll get this loop edge here and just move that down. So that's looking good. And then maybe just adjust this a little bit more. So you can see that profile is matching my terrible doodle there. So we'll go and delete that doodle. And then at this point, let's throw this blocky monitor into a subdivision surface and see what we got. So throw that in subdivision surface. You can see this like looks like a boot laying down, which is kind of funny. But what we're going to do is add those support loops to sharpen these edges, right? So if I hit Q, what I'm gonna do is let's just create a cut right down the center. So M and then L, hold the shift key down, cut, and then hit the E key to get the move tool, double click that edge loop and hit M and then S for bevel. So we've done this before. We're just gonna bevel this out like so. And so you can see we're sharpening these two edges here. We'll do the same thing for the bottom and the top. So let's hit M and then L, and we will go and create a cut at the bottom here. You can see that this cut isn't totally flat, it kind of bends downward back here. So what I can do is hit E to get the move tool, double click this loop selection here. And let me actually go to my display, go to isoparm so we don't have all those other edges kind of cluttering our view, and hitting T for scale, scaling this down on the Y, holding the shift key to constrain it increments of 5% and shrinking that to 0%. You can see exactly what I did. And now I can just move this down. And so you see we are kind of rounding out the bottom edge here, okay? And so at this point, we can go and do the same thing for the top here. So we'll hit M and then L and create a loop cut right here. I'm gonna try to match the distance of this top edge to the second edge and try to create the same distance between this edge and this edge too, so everything looks nice and rounded equally. And so you can see we just rounded that edge as well, and that's looking pretty nice so far. Now at this point, we can round the edges even further by selecting these edges here and then double clicking and holding the shift key down to add to selection there, double clicking, add that group of edges to my selection as well, and then right clicking and going to iron. If I hit Q, you can see how the iron kind of is like rounding everything out just slightly. So that's looking pretty nice. And let's actually go and select these edges here. And you can see how this is looking a little bit odd. I'm just gonna move this in the Z and then the Y and just round that out very nicely like so. Maybe you can shrink this down a little bit. You can select these edges here and shrink these down as well. So just kind of see what happens when you shrink things down or grow things and see if it's getting the right kind of curvature that you want. And so I think that's looking pretty good. Pretty basic monitor. I think the one thing I want to do is make the backside here a little bit longer. So I'll hit Q and we'll select all these polygons here and just hit the Q key and just move this out ever so slightly. And maybe double click to get that group of edges and move this down. So you can see what happens as we're moving this down. We're adjusting how that curvature is. And so I'm liking that. It's looking pretty good. And so now I think we're ready to start creating the screen. And so what we're going to want to do is first I need to go and we kind of defined where the top of the screen will be. We can kind of inner extrude and then extrude, but we need to define like where the bottom of our monitor will be. We don't have a cut there yet. So let's go and do that. We'll hit M and then L and we'll create a cut, say right about here. And you can see that this loop isn't very flat. So E key for move, double click to get that edge loop, T for scale, hold the shift key down, we'll just scale that down. And now it's up to what we want the monitor's width and height to be. And so I'll just move this up ever so slightly. And I'll actually go and let's just select the model mode so I can have all of my objects selected. I'm just gonna scale this, hit T for scale and just scale this a little bit wider, like so. And then go back to my edge mode and that's looking pretty good, okay? And so now at this point, I can go and grab this polygon and inner extrude this. So M and then W is inner extrude. And so here is where we'll kind of get the outline of our screen. And then at this point, I can command, click and drag to extrude this in like so. And so if we hit Q, we can see that we have a very rounded place where our monitor will sit. And so just like with the keyboard base, we need to add some control cuts here to sharpen these edges. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna hit M and then L, and I'm gonna create a loop cut right down the center. So I'm gonna hit Shift and click right down the center. And then just like we did before, go to our edge mode, double click that new edge, and then bevel it. So M and then S. And you can see as I pull this out, we're gonna round out and sharpen those edges, which was really nice. We're gonna make sure we don't have the subdivision up here or anything like that. We're gonna make the subdivision 0, and this is looking good. So you can see we have a nice control cut here and a control cut here to kind of sharpen up the top of the screen here, but we don't have a horizontal cut right here to sharpen up the bottom of this monitor. So let's hit M and then L, and we'll just cut right there. And you can see now we have this nice sharpened monitor screen, okay? So what we can do as well is double click this edge, and make sure that these are kind of equidistant from the bottom edge here and the top edge. So just kind of shaping that. You can even scale this up. You can see as I scale this up or down, how tight or round those edges of the monitor, those corners of the monitor will be. And so you can see how this is kind of rounding out on the inside. So what we can do is hit M and then L and create a cut right here. So I'm holding the shift key down. I'm just going to add one right there. And so if I undo that, let me do that again so you can see what happens. So we're just tightening it up just a little bit. And I think that's looking pretty nice. Let's go to our model mode so we can look at this without the lines. And so I think what I might want to do is actually sharpen the bottom here even more. So M and then L. And you can see how we just sharpen that a little bit. And I can actually select this loop selection by double clicking on it and just moving it forward. You can see when we do that, how it's sharpening this edge. So it's very important to understand edge loops, and the closer edges are to one another, the sharper that subdivision surface will get, okay? So this is looking really nice, at least I think it is. And what we can do at this point is let's try to model in, and I wanna create a circle button here, and I wanna model it into my geometry here. And I'm gonna have it centered along this edge right there. And so what I need to do to create something that's round is if you create a circle, you need at least 6 edges to create a circle. So I got one edge, and if I create a cut here, actually learn if I hold the shift key down, I can create a straight line. And one here, there's the existing edge. And if I create a cut here and one down the center, we got this existing edge and this existing edge. So if we count here, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 edges here. And so what we can do with these edges is basically round them out enough that we can create a circle with those edges. Okay, so that might not make a lot of sense right now, but let's go and create those cuts and I'll show you what I mean. So let's select the monitor, hit M and then L, and we'll create a cut right here, one right here, one here, and one right here. And if I go and select these 4 polygons here, we'll have 8 edges with these 4 polygons selected. So what I can do is right click and go to fit circle, just like we did with the pigeon leg. And you can see what we did. We could create a nice little circle, but what's happening is it's distorting the edges all across the rest of our object here. And we don't want to do that. So we'll undo that. And what we'll do is create basically a support inner extrude, which will allow us to do whatever we want inside of these polygons, but not affect anything outside of it. So let me show you what that means. So if I hit M and then W and inner extrude here, okay, so look at these edges here. And then if I right click and go to fit to circle, you can see that now when I'm making that circle, it's not distorting any of these other edges. So these are called support loops. And these are also support loops around our monitor here, because no matter what I do, say right here, it's not going to affect, like I'm moving this and distorting the heck out of it. It's not disturbing that edge right there. So when I say support loops and stuff like that, that just means it's a loop of edges that's going to lock in this roundness here, no matter what I do outside of it. Okay. So with these edges kind of fit the circle, and I can even like straighten this bunch of points right here, like so. I can go and I can inner extrude. So let me go and hit the Q key to turn on subdivision surface. And if I go and hit the controller command key down and click and drag to extrude in, and I'll extrude again as well to sharpen that up, you can see we got this nice little hole. And what I'll do as well is hit M and then L and create a nice little loop cut here. And you can see we just tighten that edge as well. And so what I can do at this point is make this nice and round by matching these circular edges. So to do that, I'm going to select points and hit M and then O and slide these to match kind of the profile of what we had before. So like so. And you can see as I'm doing that, I'm adjusting that curve and matching this round curve here. So I can even adjust to make these a little bit more aligned, like so. And so we got this nice circle here. What I can do at this point is select these polygons, which they're already selected, and I can right click and split this out into its own object, and this will be button. And so at this point, I can go and extrude this out like so. And let's throw this button in its own subdivision surface. And you can see what that looks like. Let's add a loop cut here. So M and then L to sharpen that out. And so you can see we got this nice little button. We can even select this point and can see if we want that to be flat or a little bit rounded. And so you can see what this looks like. So that button I think is sticking out a little bit too far. So what we can do, and you notice the axis center is way over here. So let's go to Tools, Axis, Center Axis 2. Now I can just kind of shrink this down in the Z and adjust that. Now this is a totally separate object that we just busted out from our main geometry. So it's totally fine to have objects not modeled into each other. You can have a separate button. You could also model the button into this entire mesh so it's a single mesh, but you can see what's going on here. So we'll do the same thing to create our monitor screen. So we'll go and select these polygons right here. So we'll select these polygons, and actually one easy way to do that, if you want to select a whole face of polygons, what we're going to do is hit U and then N for Phong break selection. What a Phong break is if a polygon bends a certain angle, it's going to break the Phong shading. And so you can see how you can select different polygon faces. So all the polygons that are kind of flat, that's going to create its own little island. So I'm going to select that Phong break selection of polygons, hit the E key to see what we got, and I'll right click and we'll split this out as well. And we have our screen here, and we'll create a whole separate subdivision surface for this. And let's actually rename these subdivision surfaces. So button, SDS, monitor, SDS, and screen, SDS. And with that screen object selected, I can command click and drag to extrude this out like so, and hit Command A to select all these polygons and move them out. And so you can see what we got here. Let's turn back on the monitor subdivision surface. And so there you go. Now another thing we can do is I can select these edges right here, and let's actually solo this object by hitting the solo object button, and we'll select these edges here, here, and here, and right clicking and going to iron. And again, we're just going to round out those edges ever so slightly. Let's unsolo, and we can do the same thing on the monitor as well. So let's go and solo the monitor. And so I'll select these edges here. And if your axis ever gets in the way to hide the axis is Alt or Option D, and that will hide that on or off. So if you ever are trying to figure out where your axis went, it might be because you accidentally hit Alt or Option D. So I'll hide that very quickly. And we'll select these edges here, these edges here, and I'll hit Alt or Option D to turn back on our axis, and we'll right click, iron, and we'll just iron this ever so slightly just to round that out, unsolo everything, and see what we got. Nice monitor action going on here. So what we can do at this point is open back up our keyboard. So there's our keyboard. Let's group all these objects together, Alt or Option G, and this is keyboard. And remember, we can copy and paste between projects. So Command or Control C, we'll go to our untitled project here, and Command or Control V. You can see our keyboard's super big. Let's scale this down. And actually, remember, you always want to build and model things to scale. So what we'll do at this point is bring a scaly object in here. Remember Bob the figure guy? You can see that this is the 6-foot human being, And this is a giant monitor and a giant keyboard, right? So let's go and let's select all of these monitor objects, Alt-Option-G to group these together, name this monitor. We're going to select both the keyboard and the monitor. We're just going to shrink this down to like real world size. And let's actually get out of our Garage Shading with Lines by hitting N and then A. And so just kind of move and scale this down. I think that's looking pretty good. Maybe shrink down the keyboard a little bit more. That's about real world scale there, I think. And we'll delete the figure guy. Thank you. And you can kind of see on the monitor here, on the screen, getting this kind of pinching. So what we can do is just kind of select these polygon faces here. And we can even go and iron these out as well. Kind of round everything out. And actually, we have this extra cut on this side that we actually don't need. So let's go double click this loop edge, right click, dissolve. And now what we can do is we can adjust these loop edges, just kind of scaling them like so. And we can even go and select these polygon faces here and shrinking them and extruding one more time and scaling these down and ironing these. And you can kind of see a nice more rounded screen. Let's go Tools, Axis, Axis Center 2. You can kind of adjust this as you please. But there you go. 3D client gig. Now the client is Mombi Games, and they're looking for you to take their 2D illustration and bring it to the third dimension and render out an image that they can use for their new website that's announcing their new online gaming platform. So they sent along this brief here with brand colors and the icons and the logo. They want to be turned into 3D, as well as some helpful mood boards here that you can see that show the vibe that they're going for. So you can see all these nice little 3D icons, all that kind of stuff. So they want the logo kind of centered in the composition, like this little megaphone, and then have all the other 3D icons around it, kind of rotated and off axis, so it feels very energetic. And again, since you're making them 3D, you want to rotate them so it shows that depth and not just have them be kind of flat to the camera. You can see how there's a little bit of rotation to all of these. And so the final deliverable will be a 1920 by 1080